Hey friends, Peggy Hall back with you from thehealthyamerican.org. Thank you everyone for reaching out to me to see how I'm doing here on the east coast of Florida, where I am currently. I still live in California part-time. God has called us to see what's out there in America, and it frankly is nice to have a break from all of the chem clouds, the crime, and the communism in California, where there is so much hostility and oppression that really hampers my ability to defend truth and freedom. So I can't wait to meet other healthy Americans here in Florida. Little did I know that I would be facing these tornadoes. I expected hurricanes and tropical storms and rain, but I certainly did not expect that I would be getting tornado warnings. And I just did a video for you called Milton and Me, my own personal story. So I shared a couple of videos that were taken by my friends. Luckily, we are fine. Everyone I know is fine. Sadly, there were a few fatalities in another part of the state, in another county, but there were friends of mine some miles away that actually had a tornado go right down their street. So I want to share with you what DeSantis is doing, how he is handling the disaster, and how different it is compared to Newscum and Joshie Green New Deal, what they do in California and in Hawaii. Now, I'm no fan of politicians. You know, I have a lot of my little nicknames for some of the slimy ones that I call public serpents. But so far, I felt very confident in how things were handled here in Florida. My husband and I don't watch television, but because this was an emergency and an impending disaster with the storm, we were listening to the news. We were listening to the local news, and we were also listening to the county reports of telling us about these impending tornado, not a tornado watch, but a tornado warning, which means take shelter now. So here's DeSantis. He has been going all over the state and being visible, and I think giving a lot of people confidence. Take a look at this. This is the map of Florida. I guess this is South Florida, and all of these red areas were the tornado warnings. 53 tornado warnings. And in my previous video, I shared with you a newscaster who said he had never seen this many tornadoes in one time hitting the same place, one right after the other. I understand now that tornadoes can be a part of hurricanes, especially they call it the upper right quadrant, which would have been right around here. So those are there's a name for it, where the feeder storms or something. I might not have the term right, but the bands that are going in front of the hurricane can often spawn these tornadoes. But the ferocity and the velocity and the sheer number of them took many people by surprise. So that's just so that was quite interesting. What I want to talk about in this video is what DeSantis was doing in terms of the disaster and what he did right. So I just have a little bit of a summary, and then I'll share with you the emergency management page. And I will also say that the director of emergency management in Florida is like head and shoulders above the rest of what we saw, you know, on Maui and in Hawaii, how they were so absolutely inept. Unbelievable. But here in Florida, this is how DeSantis handles disasters. Several days before the hurricane made landfall, this is on October 5th, DeSantis issued his first executive order, and he activated the Florida National Guard, the Florida State Guard. He procured 50,000 linemen to be on hand to restore power. Now, think about this in contrast to California, where we are told by that governor that the climate crisis is responsible for these fires and these weather events that are occurring that we can't control. So unlike DeSantis, who is actually preparing the resources and the personnel and all of the infrastructure and so forth to be ready to handle these disasters, Newsom just lets the fires burn so he can blame it on climate change. And I will tell you that in all of the news conferences that I have heard from DeSantis, he never once mentioned the climate as being a cause for these events. So I got to hand it to him on that. He said that in the aftermath of Helene, the power was on faster than ever. So that is part of this preparing in advance. He also had 1 million gallons in gasoline reserves to send out to gas stations that were running out of gas. Think about it. In California, they're making it illegal to have gas stations. You cannot get a permit to open up a gas station in the city of Los Angeles. And I think it's San Francisco, and other cities are following suit. So they're in California, they want you to have electric vehicles that are not going to do you any good in an evacuation because you run out of power. And if the power is out, you're not able to charge it. And think about the electric vehicles in Florida. DeSantis also reminded everyone that you cannot drive those electric vehicles in water and that there are dangers for these batteries exploding, that you can't put them out with water. So he is actually helping people understand the dangers of the electric vehicles, whereas Newsom is trying to get people to drive them. It's just night and day in how these states are managed. Love him or hate him, when it comes to DeSantis, he's doing these things right. He had so many people and resources pre-staged, ready to go. Some other things that were in this executive order: he waived the toll fees on the turnpike so people could get out of Dodge. He made shelters available to the public with all public facilities, schools, colleges, universities, and other facilities owned by the state. He also, in the executive order, allowed for out-of-state licensed medical professionals and social workers could work under the Department of Health in the state of Florida. If they worked for free, they were able to come and assist. So that may be something that happens in many states where they have that type of reciprocal arrangement, which I think is fantastic. So basically, he had everything ready to deploy. My husband actually went out a little bit earlier today. He said that he already saw the linemen out restoring power. Think about what happened in Maui. It's just the ineptitude of those public servants is stunning compared to what we are seeing here in Florida. And there were also emergency vehicles that were just staged and ready to go. In the videos that I shared with you in my previous video called Milton and Me, I shared a couple of actual videos that came from my friends that I sent. And you can just do a quick search online and you can see what the different counties, what the sheriffs were doing, and the first responders. It was top notch, unlike California, where they let these things burn and it's absolutely inept. Then Newsom also said that it was illegal. Well, it is. There already is a law, but he reminded everyone that it is illegal under Florida law to overcharge for any essential commodity or service. So you can't price gouge. You cannot suddenly put your gasoline for sale, 20 cents more a gallon, or sell batteries or other items that you would use in an emergency. You can't jack up the prices. And in the state of California, in the state of Florida, I don't know if it's a law or whether this was something that DeSantis just did, but during these preparation times in front of these disasters, there is no sales tax on things like batteries and flashlights and generators and all of that. So that would help people get those items if they needed them. Then he also wrote into the executive order that people should be allowed to return to their homes as quickly as possible when it is safe. Now, when I went to New Orleans in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, it was so devastating. It was so heartbreaking that people were not allowed back into their homes. Yet there I was, somebody all the way from California going in to try to rescue their animals where they themselves could not be let in. So I think laws are changing state by state in order to address these things. Remember, these disasters and catastrophes and weather events are state issues. They are not federal issues. The federal issues come up if a state cannot handle it on their own. The governor has to invite in FEMA in order to help. I have not yet heard about FEMA doing anything in Florida. There are always strings attached when FEMA comes in. I'm not saying, well, actually, FEMA did set up, I apologize. FEMA did set up for the first responders where they could stay in the Tampa Bay Dome, which actually got hit by a tornado, or maybe it was hurricane damage. But the point being, the idea that people are always looking to the federal government, which is, would you rather have the federal government helping you or your friends and neighbors? And I know there's a lot out there about what's going on in Helene, in the aftermath of Helene with FEMA. So I want to share with you in my next video about some of the damage that was done to farms and animal rescue groups. The Animals are fine, thank God, but I want to share with you how people were reaching out to help one another. That's what I like to see. So the director of emergency management in Florida is excellent. He's well-spoken. He's organized. He is qualified. He's top-notch compared to these others that we see in other states. I'm telling you, in Maui, that guy was literally deadly because he didn't do the job correctly. I mentioned again, I'm just looking at my notes, nowhere does DeSantis blame climate for the weather. He does just the opposite. He was talking about the history of storms in Florida and how there actually have been fewer storms when you look at a period of time. He said between 2006 and 2016, there were basically hardly any hurricanes at all. And the most devastating storms in Florida in terms of the number of people who died and also the most widespread damage. One was in 1920, the Okeechobee hurricane, which about 4,000 people perished, which is so sad. Many of them were immigrant workers on farms. And think about it, Florida had a very low population back then. So the percentage of the population that was devastated was even bigger 100 years ago. And then almost 100 years ago, a little shy of that, in 1930, there was a Labor Day hurricane. Now, they were not named like they are now with Milton and Nadine and Leslie and all of that. By the way, I don't like the fact, let me know what you think in a comment. I do not care for the fact that hurricanes are named after people. It really bothers me because think about it. Anybody named Milton or Helene or Katrina or Ian is forever going to have their name associated with these disasters. I think that's discrimination, and I am not being snarky. They could have a simple system, and I think we should all write to the federal oceanographic, hurricanes.gov and recommend this, that it should be numbered. For example, we're in 2024, so it should be 2020, A 2024, B 2024, C 2024. And maybe if all of those were Pacific hurricane, or if all of those were in one area, they could be labeled with a letter of the alphabet. And then on the other side, they could be labeled with a number. So 1, 2024, 2, 2024, or something along those lines. It would be easy to remember. And I do not like this idea of using people's names. And by the way, when you look at the people's names, it's not that diverse, if you know what I'm saying. Just a little levity there, friends, a little levity here in the aftermath of the disaster. So obviously now there are more people in Florida. Florida is the third most populous state. We've got California with about 40 million. We've got Texas with 20 million plus, maybe 30 million. And Florida now is at 22 million people. So there are more people, there are more buildings, yet the destruction and the devastation is not as bad as it was 100 years ago. So for those reasons, things are moving in the right direction. Now, I promised you that I would share with you this website about Governor DeSantis and some of the things that he has done in terms of handling these disasters. So here we go. I'll leave a link for you at my Substack, peggyhall.substack.com. And this is called floridadisaster.org. So these are the updates, all of the things that they've done, getting law enforcement ready, Department of Veterans Affairs, Fish and Wildlife Conservation. So there were airboats ready, shallow draft boats, ATVs, larger platform vessels, four-wheel vehicles, and all of these other things that he spelled out. And I'm not going to read it for you. Just wanted to give you an overview in terms of how the governor prepared in advance. So what I've been talking about, my criticism in California and in Hawaii and in other places where they are pointing the finger at climate change. Well, you can't point the finger at climate change and then not be prepared for it. If in California, the climate alarmists are saying that the fires are going to burn hotter, longer, they're going to be deadlier, they're going to defy physics, yet they didn't prepare. They don't have a checklist like DeSantis does. They didn't increase the number of firefighters. They didn't create more resources. What about AI? What about drones? What about higher optics? What about more vehicles? What about more firefighting techniques? All they're going to do is let the state burn and then blame it on the climate, that's exactly what they're doing. So as you can see, I'm getting a little hot under the collar. It's very distressing to see how California is falling behind these other states when it comes to being prepared for these disasters. So that's what I have for you, friends. I wanted to talk about how DeSantis handles disasters. Let me know what you think about this. Are there any resources that I missed? You can email me, support@thehealthyamerican.org. Stick with me. I've got another video coming up for you, which is all about how to help the animals. This one is heartbreaking for me. I've got my little paw print here close to my heart for all of the animals that I've loved, that I will love. And I know that so many in my audience have a compassionate heart for all of God's creatures. Thank you, everybody, for being on board. Get on my free Substack, peggyhall.substack.com, and I'll see you in the very next broadcast.